Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Thank you very much for joining us, ladies and gentlemen, for Point of View. I'm Penna Dexter. In studio with me is also Lathan Watts from First Liberty Institute. And we have a lot to talk about today. First, though, I want to thank God for really sparing the building, the studios where Point of View are, from a terrible tornado that you probably heard about that took place on Sunday night here in the Dallas area. And if you look, I didn't know this because I haven't been in all week, but as I came in and looked out the windows, we're on the 10th floor, you could see certain establishments just in our immediate vicinity that had major damage to them, roofs off and things like that. And I know that there was some trouble first couple of days of the week with our broadcast, but we were able to broadcast taped shows, and there was just no damage as far as our facility here. So you hate to look at the others and say, thank God that we were spared, but thank God that we were spared. We're happy that we were, and we thank the Lord for really not allowing anyone to be killed. No major injuries in this horrible tornado or set of tornadoes, and no one trapped, but tons and tons of property damage that's going to have to be fixed in the area. So these tornadoes are, they're very selective in where they hit, and so we happen to be in one of the areas that actually wasn't hit. But tornadoes, to me, Lathan, are one of the scariest natural phenomenon as far as weather goes.
I grew up in Northeast Arkansas, and these are kind of a way of life there.
Are they?
But you're right in that you rarely have much notice.
Yeah.
You can try.
This one was truly, that was very true of this one.
Right. You can try to be as prepared as possible, but it can do a lot of damage in very little time, and it does seem sometimes like it's just almost completely at random, hit this house and miss the next one. So thankfully, although I've heard these are going to end up being probably the most expensive storms in maybe in history in Texas as it relates to tornado damage. But as you said, thankfully no loss of life, and doesn't seem to be too many major or serious injuries to people. Obviously serious damage to property, but it can be certainly a scary thing to go through. I've been through a few,
I wonder if do you think that if you've grown up with this, possibility of happening, have you got used to it? Like I got used to earthquakes in California.
Yes, absolutely. It's one of those things. I think kind of what you grow up with becomes normal to you. Mm-hmm. So, yes, it's just kind of a way of life. It's just part of living in certain parts of the country, and you do what you can, and hope and pray that you're not one of the unlucky ones that it touches down and affects. And thank God when it doesn't, and pray for those who are impacted by it. But I probably have a little bit, maybe a more laid back attitude towards
you seem like it
than some. But I do have clear memories of being under a table in my grandmother's house with her and my mother and my sister, and listening to the radio and hearing them call out the street that my dad's office was on,
Wow.
as the tornado was here. And my grandmother telling me, and I was about 10 at the time, to lead the family in prayer because I might be the man of the house now.
Wow.
Once you've gotten through that, it's not probably going to get much more intense than that for you. So I think maybe that's why, living through that at a young age, I've sort of adapted a bit of a laissez-faire attitude about it.
I guess so. Well, God is in control, and I certainly am going to continue praying. We have these visible reminders around us here in Dallas. But ladies and gentlemen, I do want to mention another piece of breaking news that we're going to cover much more at length in the next hour, and that is that this story about James Younger, and it's become a national story, but we actually interviewed his father back in the early spring of this year in studio, and then later by phone, Jeff Younger, and there have been some interesting developments in this case this week since kindergarten. The mother of this boy, James, Dr. Georgelis, enrolled James, he's 7 years old, in school as a girl under the name Luna. Then she began telling him he's a girl when he was just 3 and testified in court that she began to believe that he was a girl when he liked a McDonald's toy that was meant for girls. That seems a little minor of a justification. James' pediatrician records also indicate that Dr. Georgelis, his mom, has met with this medical transition clinic in Dallas and is considering hormone suppression when James is closer to 8 or 9 years old. Now this has been the subject of there's a jury basically that ruled for the mother to have complete control. The next day, a judge kind of took control there, and they have joint medical responsibility for this young man. So the mom is not going to be able to do everything unilaterally, but there's still a lot out there, Lathan. And people in Texas, officials, are starting to get involved in it. One of them will join us, Chip Roy. He's a congressman from the state of Texas in the next hour. So we'll cover this and talk about it, and we'll allow folks to weigh in. It's really an emotional story, isn't it?
It certainly is. It's one of those things you just shake your head. I cannot believe this sort of thing, would happen anywhere. That to think that a parent would do this to a child based on he liked a toy in a McDonald's Happy Meal. I mean, it's just my own personal. I mean, the opinion is this is abuse.
Right.
And
I agree.
If she had been allowed to go through with some of the things that apparently she was considering, and who knows, she may, continue on this path, but at least now I think the father's going to have, a way to have some input and hopefully fight it and keep it from happening. When you're talking about things like chemical castration of a boy who is 7, I don't know any other way to describe it, but you are abusing this child. You are altering this child's life in a way that may not be able to be undone. It is. I'm just almost speechless that somebody, would even consider this. Especially when you get, he wanted to play with this toy, and that's a girl's toy.
Yeah.
Who knew? A child at that age, they go through all sorts of phases of wanting to play with this type of toy.
This child's not even being allowed to go through phases.
Yeah, exactly. Would this parent or any parent, rationally think that this little boy who is pretending to be a dinosaur today, that we need to somehow try to take action to turn him into a dinosaur? Because he's identifying as a dinosaur, it's just
crazy.
To make any, yes, it is. And it's abusive to make any kind of decision like that on behalf of a child at this age, at this point in development. It just makes no sense whatsoever.
And we'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Dr. Ann Bradley has been on my radio program and in a recent article talks about her first trip to the Soviet Union. Even as a teenager, she could see through the attempt to make Russia look more prosperous than it was. In fact, her visit was one of the reasons she became an economist. She ends her article by telling the true story of what happened when Boris Yeltsin visited the United States. He was newly elected to the Soviet Parliament and the Supreme Soviet. After he visited the Johnson Space Center, he made an unscheduled stop at Randall's grocery store in Houston. The trip to this simple grocery store changed him forever. Yeltsin roamed the aisles to see a number of products available to every customer. They were offering free cheese samples. He was overwhelmed. He could not believe the bounty before him. Even members of the elite Politburo did not have the choices available to every person who walked into the store. A reporter captured his comments in an article in the Houston Chronicle. He said, "When I saw those shelves crammed with hundreds, thousands of cans, cartons, and goods of every possible sort, for the first time I felt quite frankly sick with despair for the Soviet people." He went on to say that such a potentially super-rich country as ours had been brought to such a state of poverty. It is terrible to think of it. What a statement from a man who was powerful and well-connected politically. He may have had great political power in Russia, but he was powerless to provide it to the Russian people, what was typical for all Americans. The communist government failed to provide the basic necessities for their people, and this is what happens in a centrally controlled economy. This is a lesson we need to pass on to our children and grandchildren. The abundance of goods on the shelves of the Houston grocery store weren't provided by the government. They were provided by a free market. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. Lathan Watts and I are going to talk a little bit of Texas politics. And, of course, often what Texas does affects the entire nation. First of all, Lathan, there is an election going on. Early voting is going on 10 constitutional amendments in Texas. And I'm not really equipped to inform people much about them, except to say, and I'm going to try to get myself equipped before next Wednesday when I'm hosting again. But Prop 4, the fourth one of these amendments, has to do with a state income tax. It's actually been written to say it would be much, much harder to enact a state income tax. People would have to vote to do it by wide margins. And, of course, the lack of a state income tax in Texas, Lathan, is one of many reasons for our great prosperity and the reason people like to come and live and work here.
It certainly is. I mean, you get to keep more of your money here. So that amendment is a way to make it, as you said, more difficult, a higher bar to reach if there ever was an attempt to create a state income tax. And so it may be a bit of a belt and suspenders approach based on other things in the state constitution, but I'm always in favor of more protection of my tax dollars. So I'll definitely be voting for that one.
Yes. Now, who you have opposing this is teachers and educators, because apparently just about every tax increase in Texas, they say it's for education. But this one would be, that's who's opposing this prohibition is the teachers. But really, when you look at this, and this is coming out of, I forget what publication here, would place a ban, Prop 4 would place a ban on enacting a state income tax on individuals. If someone in the state government were to try and enact an income tax, it would require a constitutional amendment and a 2/3 majority vote to make it happen. You want to make it more difficult to impose a state income tax. But some of the folks that are for it are basically saying that we could harm our children, harm public education without having this opportunity to raise state income taxes.
Well, there's a certain political viewpoint, I guess, maybe that thinks the answer to all things related to education is more money. And I personally don't hold to that view. We have a good education system here in Texas. Could it be better? Of course. But if just spending more money was a direct causation of better education, Washington, D.C. would have the best schools in America.
That's
because
true.
they spend more per pupil there than I think anywhere. Usually when the rankings come out, it's right up there, if not number one, as far as money spent. Now, look at the results. It's hardly ever towards the top as in other rankings. So just spending more money on something doesn't always improve it. Causation, correlation, we can get into all those logical fallacies if we want to. But but there's always going to be people who think we can do this better if we have more money. And there will always be people who say you should do a better job with the money that you have. And
we do have several schools, we reported on this earlier, that are building water parks, which I could argue that has not much to do with education.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty easy argument to make. There's always differences of opinion when it comes to public education and how to make it better. But this amendment that we're talking about is really not specifically about education. It's about raising the bar and making it difficult to enact a state income tax. And there's nothing that stops anyone from voluntarily sending more of their money to the government. If you want to send more of your money to the government, go right ahead. I personally think I do a better job with my money than the government does, state or federal. And so I'm all in favor of anything that makes it more difficult for the government to take more of my money.
I'll try to bone up a little bit on some of these other amendments by Wednesday, but I do want to mention, Lathan, we posted an article from the Wall Street Journal. I saw it yesterday. It's by Karl Rove. It's this column, How the Democrats Will Keep Texas Red. And, there are a lot of people saying, and there are people that are in the know that I respect, that we have to watch out for Texas going purple. And when you think about the attraction this state has for economic activity, jobs, et cetera, that makes sense because you don't know who's coming in. Some people are going to be a little bit more liberal than your typical Texan. All the cities in Texas are going to the left. So Karl Rove's addressing this and saying that, yes, there are these dangers, but actually it might not be what it was in 2018. In 2018, in the midterm elections, Democrats picked up 2 congressional seats and made gains in the state legislature, and also Beto O'Rourke came close to defeating Senator Ted Cruz. So that was, that's kind of got people alarmed. And but Karl Rove says that we have really gotten our act together, that the Texas Republicans have prepared. John Cornyn, the senior senator, and I believe is running for re-election in this next election, he's pulled together some efforts. Our governor, Greg Abbott, he won big. He won by 13.3 points. And he is also focused on re-energizing GOP efforts to register and turn out voters. And so really the Democrats cannot count on our complacency. We are not complacent, those on the right. I'm putting myself in that category because I am on the right. I want to see Texas remain red. And then Democrats are likely going to nominate a presidential candidate, says Karl Rove, with a deeply anti-Texas platform. We can talk about that, especially on energy. So in those situations, and because of those things, it may be the Democrats, according to Karl Rove, who actually help Texas to stay red, especially with their nomination of whoever they nominate. I mean, now one of the most conservative people in the field, I read today, Tim Ryan has dropped out of the presidential race. He wasn't really a factor there. But what we're seeing is that the leftist ideas are what are holding sway, aren't they?
I do think this is probably as you look at the entire candidate field of those who are left, and even those who were in it before, I do think it is probably as far left as I've seen the Democratic Party, at least in my lifetime. And I agree with some of Rove's analysis in his column that whoever comes out of that gaggle of folks that are running for president on the Democrat side is likely going to be too far left for a lot of voters in Texas. I think people were rightly concerned after seeing Beto O'Rourke get as close as he did to Ted Cruz in a statewide race. But you also have to remember in that election cycle, it was a midterm, and that race, Beto challenging Cruz, was basically he was the beneficiary of a nationwide effort by the DNC because there wasn't money. He was the name on the ballot for the left, and there was national interest in that race, and he was the benefit of a lot of help from celebrities and you name it, and he still couldn't win. So being the only race on the ballot really that the left was investing in a huge way in money and time and effort and all of that, and still not be able to win statewide, it was concerning to see him get that close. But I think when you take all of that into account, I think that's part of what Rove is getting at, is that this time it's not a midterm, and 2020 you will have Trump at the top of the ticket, you'll have Cornyn, you'll have Abbott, you'll have all of these people and their individual campaigns and their machines working together, whereas that midterm you had a very high, a marquee matchup at the top of it that was important for a lot of reasons nationwide to the DNC, and they still couldn't win that.
I still never really got it with Beto O'Rourke, but he obviously it was sort of a phenomenon.
Definitely.
Seems to have passed.
Well, like I said, he was the benefit of being the one guy. He was the star, and being the star and the one guy, they didn't do a whole lot of real scrutiny. Mm-hmm. Well, you run for president, you're no longer the guy. You're one of 20, and other Democrats are going to do that sort of scrutiny to distinguish themselves from you, and he hasn't done himself any favors. And the bloom is off the rose for sure with Beto.
Well, that's interesting and exciting, and I think we're going to spend some more time in this hour talking about energy, because that's an important factor in all of this in the state of Texas and really across the country. And one of the more disturbing, I think, positions of some of the presidential candidates. So that's going to weigh in across the nation, but especially in the state of Texas. So stick with us. We've got more Texas politics and national politics here on Point of View.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Penna Dexter.
And Lathan Watts, attorney from First Liberty Institute. And, what I love about doing the show with you, Lathan, is, yes, you are up on all the religious liberty issues of the day. And, of course, your case is at First Liberty, but also you are just a political animal. You've worked in politics most of your career, so it's fun to talk about these political issues with you. And here in Texas, I'm kind of referring right now to this article we've posted at pointofview.net. It's a column by Karl Rove, How the Democrats Will Keep Texas Red. And one way is on energy. Every major, this is what Karl Rove, I'm reading from the article, every major Democratic hopeful pledges to halt oil and gas leases on federal lands and in federal waters, with Elizabeth Warren promising to sign such an executive order on her first day as president. Now, this is going to hit hard in New Mexico, Colorado, Wyoming, and North Dakota because they have a lot of drilling on federal lands. We do not in Texas. But what we do have is our companies are big players in federal waters in the Gulf of Mexico. Ending drilling there would devastate Houston and southeast Texas. Plus, in Texas, the oil and gas industry employs nearly 350,000 Texans, and 100,000 more work in refineries. So in Texas, the Democrat position, all in the name of protecting the climate from climate change, is just, these are devastating positions to take. So I think it's going to help not only our candidates or the candidates on the right, but also President Trump. What do you think?
Definitely. I mean, the energy sector in Texas, as you mentioned, it's hard to overstate what a big factor it is in the Texas economy. And, from a nationwide perspective, the energy sector, is a major driver of the U.S. economy. So by sort of reversing some old policies and opening up more places to drill, Texas and U.S. are now net exporters of energy. We used to hear political debates talk about how we needed to kick our dependence on foreign oil and how it was a national security issue. Well, the way to do that is produce more of it here, and that's what we've done. And I think the economy that we have right now is bearing the fruit of that. You look at the national unemployment rate, the unemployment rate in Texas. You mentioned how many people work directly in the industry here in Texas, and that's not to say I don't think that number includes the people who are sort of indirectly employed by the energy industry.
Right.
There's lots of companies that service the companies who are directly involved in exploration and extraction and refining, and then there's all the the smaller companies that serve those companies. So particularly as I mentioned, Houston and Southeast Texas, where our major refinery capacity is down there, this sort of policy change would be a devastating blow to the economy there specifically, and then Texas nationwide, statewide. And Texas is such a large part of the economy. It's sort of like if Texas sneezes, the whole economy gets a cold. They used to say that about General Motors. At one point, if GM sneezes, the American economy gets a cold. I think if the Texas economy, would be comparable to that now. So, I agree that that sort of policy is not going to be popular with a lot of Texans. I think it could also have an impact, election-wise, on the kind of the moderate middle, the people who aren't rabidly Republican or rabidly Democrat. They may not, they may be consider themselves independents. And if you're kind of on the fence between Trump and whoever is the Democrat nominee, and you see this plank in their policy platform that could directly impact you,
right?
That could be a deciding factor. I mean, a lot of people vote their pocketbook. A lot of people who who may not have a particular party affiliation or a set of
Maybe they don't care about the social issues the way a lot of
maybe
us
not.
do.
Yeah, I mean, they may not have a core political philosophy. They may be much more practical or pragmatic to them, and I think that has been borne out over political history. That a good economy is in a good economy, it's tough to unseat an incumbent president when the economy's going well, because so many people look at the economy and go, oh, well, he must be doing a good job. Let's not change horses, midstream. And so I do think that will be a factor. I agree with Rove's analysis there, that for Texas specifically, I think it'll be a very big issue.
This whole idea of climate change and penalizing fossil fuel industries and requiring and making laws about renewables or mileage standards and things like that. I mean, in the next segment, we'll kind of bring up some of the things that are happening in California. It's really absolutely unbelievable there. A lot of their problems are because of their environmental policies that they've been implementing over the years. They've got blackouts going on now. They pay twice as much for gas as most other states. I mean, they've got a homeless crisis. People can't afford to rent an apartment. I mean, my sister was visiting me this last week from California. She lives in L.A. And people are just struggling trying to find a place to live. And it's no wonder there's so much homelessness. I mean, there are other factors, but sometimes it's just the price of housing. And so, I don't know why they keep electing Democrats there, or I wouldn't just say Democrats. People on the far left are in control there. And I don't see how they can keep doing that. How can they sustainably keep? I mean, it's almost like these policies are a luxury for a rich state. And in a sense, that state is rich in natural resources and other things. But when the average common person can't run his business because he doesn't have power, can't afford an apartment, and now they're even talking about taking away gas appliances.
And public policy matters. These are not just theoretical arguments. And I think that for some people they are. That I believe in this policy and I'm always going to advocate for it. You have an object lesson right there in California of what happens when these policies are implemented. And you can compare and contrast, just on energy policy, like referred to in the Rove article. These things impact people's lives on a daily basis, and policy decisions matter. It is not just a political debate. When these policies are implemented, it affects people every day in their real life. There are real life consequences to be paid for enacting bad policy. And I think a lot of people just consider this, well, it's just politics. And, I'm on the right, so I believe this. I'm on the left, so I believe that. And it's just a rhetorical debate. It is not. When policy gets implemented, especially California is a perfect example, over decades and decades of this type of policy being implemented, where you basically have one party control in California, we are seeing the results. I mean, I kind of joke about it that nobody creates jobs in Texas better than California, because their policy drives out business, and a lot of those businesses come to Texas, and that has impact here as well. But these things matter. It is not just a rhetorical argument that has to be won or lost. And when you see the results, hopefully people wake up to the fact that what is going on there is a result of the policy implemented there. And so if you left there because it's so bad, and you move to some place like Texas or Florida that doesn't have a income tax, or other states whose economies are doing better, you should recognize that it's because of the policies in place here, and don't come here and vote for the same nonsense you voted there that ended up running you out of the state.
I think that's what we have to guard against.
That's exactly right.
Talking about keeping Texas red.
That's exactly right.
That is one area where we have to be vigilant.
Mm-hmm. It will be a factor. The folks that have come here from other states, but refuse to acknowledge the fact that it's the policies they voted for that made it impossible for them to live the kind of life they wanted to live, and they sought a better life here. Well, maybe you should embrace the policy that's in place here then.
We're going to just double down a little bit because I think just not to bash California, which is my home state. I couldn't get to Texas fast enough, though. But just to show the contrast in policies and how they work, why they work, and why they don't work, I think would be instructive. We'll do that in the last segment. And I want to mention that, you're going to hear a lot during the campaigns about climate change. But we have to remember the U.S. has led the world in reducing greenhouse gas emissions in recent decades. And that's still with our great fossil fuel industry. So keep that in mind. It appears that a United Nations agency is blocking pro-life groups from registering for a population conference set to take place in Nairobi, Kenya in mid-November. The conference is co-hosted by the UN Population Fund, commonly known as UNFPA, along with the government of Kenya. This conference marks the 25th anniversary of the Cairo Conference on Population and Development. Its organizers aim to accelerate implementation of the Cairo Plan of Action. At the Cairo Conference, delegates agreed on a strategy for stabilizing the world's population. Non-governmental organizations are important players at these UN conferences. Several pro-life NGOs have not yet been accepted to the Nairobi conference. These include Family Watch International, the Washington, D.C.-based Heritage Foundation, and CFAM, a pro-family nonprofit headed up by Austin Ruse that has worked for years to monitor and influence the social policy debate at the United Nations. Austin Ruse points out that at the Cairo conference, ultimately abortion was cast in a negative light as something to be avoided, a matter for national governments and not for international organizations like the UN. But UNFPA succeeded for the first time at getting reproductive health officially defined as including abortion in the document produced by that conference. Their goal was to deal with overpopulation. One could argue that today, 25 years after Cairo, those concerns have been replaced by fears of devastating consequences from declining birth rates. So why does the UN need to accelerate its efforts to reduce populations? The answer? Abortion. UNFPA is all about the promotion of abortion, even coerced abortion. UNFPA doesn't want pro-life NGOs forcing negotiations on the document they've already written to bludgeon nations into accepting pro-abortion policies. This cynical effort to magnify pro-abortion voices at the UN must be stopped. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
According to some candidates for president, the climate change issue is the most important. Climate change is the most important threat to our country and its existence that exists right now, which is ridiculous and crazy. But, Lathan, when you look at this, as you mentioned, climate change is an issue, or global warming, climate change, the climate's going to change. It's not a problem that the climate changes. If global warming is an issue that can be a problem, that's arguable whether or not it's a real problem right now. But if it is, it's an international problem because different countries are emitting differently. And actually the U.S., even though we're not part of this UN Paris Agreement, we still have reduced our emissions just because we've been prosperous. Our companies have have implemented ways of reducing emissions. We want our air to be clean. We want our people to be able to breathe pure air. We don't want to have a dirty environment. And that happens when you're prosperous. You can afford the more expensive technologies that clean up your emissions. So, but it's an international problem, isn't it?
Right. I mean, the climate is global. We could implement every iota of the so-called Green New Deal, and honestly, it wouldn't make a whole lot of difference unless you got everybody in the world to do the same thing. There are developing nations who, as you said, do not have the prosperity available to them to employ some of this technology because it is expensive. You have industrialized nations like India and China. China, is building coal-fired power plants at the rate Texas builds Whataburgers. If you don't get China and India involved doing all of these things, you could crush our economy with these regulations. And if China and India don't come along and do the exact same thing, it is not going to matter in the climate. The climate is global. And so why would we handicap or potentially cripple our economy if you look at all of the things that the Green New Deal would do, or a lot of the agenda items that some of the folks running for president in the Democratic Party would do? We're one of the few industrialized countries in the world right now that has reduced our emissions, as you said. And so we're already leading on this issue, but it's a global issue. And once you put America at a disadvantage economically, if you cripple our economy with these types of regulations, we will not soon be prosperous enough to do the things that we've already done. And, and that's, beside the point of whether or not you think global climate change is a crisis the way some people do and some people don't, or if you think, warming of the planet by 1 degree is, going to lead to the end of the world in a year or whatever the sky is falling prediction is this week. I mean, obviously you can probably tell by my comments, I'm a little skeptical, but even if you accept all of that, it's a global issue, and you are not going to have really sort of any measurable impact unless you get all the major industrialized countries on board to do the same thing. And, China and India being, stop number one and stop number two, if you're going to do this.
Let's take a look at California just for an example, because they've been implementing this type of policy that we're being asked to do on a national level. They've been doing this for decades. And I posted an article out of the Daily Signal by Jarrett Stepman. A new dark age, Californians' blackouts are self-inflicted. They actually are, because they're actually planned right now. You may have read that their major electric company, PG&E, Pacific Gas and Electric, has to initiate and is initiating targeted blackouts right now to limit the potential for mass wildfires because of the ones last year in 2018 that basically ravaged the state and bankrupted PG&E. So they have all these exposed power lines. They have old, aging infrastructure, and it's very likely that fires can be sparked, especially where there's a lot of dry fuel. And this time of year, it's very dry. And, of course, part of the environmental policy of California has been not to clear the brush and to keep it or to do controlled burns. So those things they're coming back to bite them now. So they've got all this brush, this tinder out there. And really, small companies, because of these targeted blackouts, I mean, yes, you may know that you're going to have a blackout on certain days, but it means for some small companies that can't afford a generator that they're seeing their losses mount up now because of this. And as this continues to go on, this is really going to hurt business in California, especially small businesses, because large chains can get the big $100,000 generators and they can make it work somehow. Small companies, some days they're just not going to be able to operate. And they have to cope regularly with this loss of power. And then there have been some fires that have actually started this week in Sonoma County in the north of San Francisco. It was caused by PG&E problems. And also there's now a fire in Santa Clarita, which is near L.A. I actually lived there before I moved to Texas. And so, it's really affecting citizens there in the state. It's going to affect the state economy. And they're saying that it's going to take at least a decade to get the provision of electricity back to where it should be because of what PG&E has been allowed to do. And PG&E's problems are partially caused by policy, by state policy, partially their own negligence. So they say this piece by Jarrett Stepman says about 1 million people in one of the most densely populated parts of the country have had their power shut off by this company. And the blackout, of course, is to limit the potential for the wildfires. It's easy to criticize PG&E, and they don't look good here, says Jarrett Stepman, but there's a lot of blame to go around, and it doesn't have anything to do with climate change. It's more poor land management, and also the fact that that this fuel, as I mentioned, has been allowed to accumulate and be very dry and ready for, a spark. There's more fuel in the forests in California that's built up over decades because of a change in forest management strategy, says Jarrett Stepman. There's a congressman, I've had him on the show before. His name is Chuck DeVore. Actually, he's not a congressman. He's a former California assemblyman. He lived there, and he tells his story about why he moved to Texas a few years ago. But he does a great job because he does a lot of research and highlights the issue, explains how the blackout crisis was largely caused by politicians there. And it's because renewable energy, Lathan, has been prioritized over reliable infrastructure. So they've put money and they've put all kinds of draconian regulations upon companies and people to use renewable energy instead of fossil fuel, not to improve their fossil fuel use the way we have here in Texas. And so it's really a sad situation, and it makes the state, to me, a beautiful state that my parents couldn't wait to get to back in the 40s and 50s, into a third world environment.
Yeah, I mean, they are dealing with some of the same issues that third world countries are, and it's because of some of the same policies. I mean, you can look at Venezuela before they adopted socialism and look at Venezuela now, and that might be a stretch to say California is on par with Venezuela, but it's an object lesson. And like we said earlier, that policy matters. They have enacted these policies, a preference for renewables versus improving how they use fossil fuel, and now you're seeing the results. So it's sad and it's unfortunate, but it impacts people's lives. Like we said before, it's not just a policy debate. It's not just a topic for the local debate club. Yeah. It's real life.
If you want to learn more, go to pointofview.net for this article about a new dark age. And we'll be back with, we've got the James Younger story, which is really pulls your heartstrings, and a lot more after this.
When you give to Point of View, does it make a difference? Jeremy Dyes would tell you that it does. He grew up listening to Point of View in the back seat of his mom's car, and it helped to shape his thinking.
I had parents that were able to sit across from me at the dinner table after we listened to Marlon Maddox and Kirby Anderson years ago and think through what the scriptures say about these issues of current significance in our lives. That's only possible because Point of View has come along and ministered into my life and made me who I am today. And here I am today defending religious liberty, partly because Marlon Maddox and Penna Dexter and Kirby Anderson were the ones that were pushing me towards all that. They taught me how to think through these issues. They didn't tell me what to think. They taught me how to think.
Each gift you give will change lives. Not every Point of View listener will become a Jeremy, but if they listen for very long, they will be changed. And that will change how they impact and affect the lives of the people around them. So make that decision to change a life today. Join the Truth Team and boldly stand for truth in a world of lies, distortion, and information manipulation. Go to pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Thank you very much for joining us, ladies and gentlemen, for Point of View. Oh, I said ladies and gentlemen. You can't do that on Air Canada anymore. They have announced, well, actually last week, Air Canada announced it will no longer use that phrase, ladies and gentlemen, on board its flights. Why? Well, this is part of a commitment to respect sexual identity, diversity, and inclusion. So instead of using ladies and gentlemen or mesdames et messieurs, all announcements on Air Canada, which are in English and French, flight attendants are now to address passengers as everybody and tout le monde. On Point of View, we're still going to welcome you, ladies and gentlemen. We're so glad you're with us today. I'm Penna Dexter, and Lathan Watts is also with me in studio. And, there's a lot to talk about with regard to impeachment and now a criminal investigation being launched with regard to how the former administration handled the Trump campaign and investigating it. And so all of that is out there. But we're going to tackle a story that's taken place here in Texas that's gotten national attention this week. It's the story of 7-year-old James Younger, and he's involved in a battle between his parents. His father is trying to protect his ability to grow up as a little boy, and his mother is leading him on the path toward making him a little girl. There's been a court battle. Now Texas state officials are weighing in, and we're going to be joined by Chip Roy, a congressman from Texas, later in the program in this hour to talk about it and what should be the state government's role in protecting children from what we see as child abuse. We will talk about that. But, Lathan, I want to talk about some of the cases and really the important matters that our listeners, they've been watching for sometimes, in some cases, years. They're very important. This summer we saw a great victory with regard to the upholding of the cross in Maryland, the Bladensburg Cross. But you've got two big cases. And so everybody, I think, wants to know how Coach Kennedy's case is, which you're hoping the Supreme Court will take and rule on.
So we've been involved, as you said, for years now with Coach Kennedy's case. And when we first started, we took him on as a client. Basically a lawsuit started at the district court level to try to protect his rights, try to initially get him reinstated as a football coach. And as that matter started, you have this First Amendment issue come up, and so the initial litigation sort of gets put on hold as that First Amendment question gets appealed up the chain. So it went up to the Ninth Circuit, where we had a very poor ruling by the Ninth Circuit that basically said if Coach Kennedy or any school employee or government employee does something religious and anyone can see you do it, that's somehow a violation of the Establishment Clause. So we appealed that to the United States Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court, decided not to take the case. And so initially we thought, oh, well, this is bad, but they did something very rare in that when they listed his case on the cert denied list, there was a little kind of statement attached to the cert denial, and that's very rare because they deny so many cases they almost never talk about why. So there was a statement about the reason to deny cert to Coach Kennedy's case, and it was written by Justice Alito, but it was joined by Gorsuch, Thomas, and Kavanaugh. So you have 4 justices who signed on to this little statement, and that number 4 is significant because when they vote on whether or not to take a case, if 4 justices vote to take a case, then it goes on the granted list. So just by the fact that they were making a statement about a case that they denied, it was already a very rare thing. And now you have 4 justices sign on to this, and then you start reading what they put in the statement, and it was remarkable in that I'm going to paraphrase here, but basically what they said is we agree that we probably that we should not take this case right now because the judge at the district court level did not really clarify well enough some issues of fact. And so if the Supreme Court got involved with it right now, it would likely end up in a very narrow or kind of fact-specific ruling. You really don't want the Supreme Court to do that. You want them to answer the big picture First Amendment questions. So they sort of explained, there's some things that need to be clarified before we could take this case. Then they went on to say that the Ninth Circuit's opinion was very troubling, which is about as bombastic as judicial language gets, usually. Very troubling. That's
an insult.
Right. And then right towards the end, they included this statement that said, by the way, we see that this was brought to us on free speech grounds, that Coach Kennedy's case is being appealed as religious speech, when clearly he has a free exercise claim to be made here. And maybe that claim wasn't brought to us because of previous decisions by this court, which we have not yet been asked to review. What they're clearly talking about is the Employment Division versus Smith case, which made it very, very difficult to win a free exercise case. And that goes all the way back to the early 90s. So you had 4 justices signaling that they are willing and able to, with the right case in front of them, go back and fix what Employment Division versus Smith got wrong. And so that was a huge, huge development in the legal community. So what we're doing right now is we are basically following the playbook that we got from that statement from the Supreme Court, and we're back at the district court in Coach's case to try to get those questions of fact clarified as best as we possibly can, to sort of remove all of that from the First Amendment question so that it is a clear vehicle for a First Amendment question to go back. We'd have to go back to the Ninth Circuit and then possibly back to the Supreme Court. But we're moving forward with the case as it was originally in the district court.
How long do you think it should take? I mean, I know you can't say, but years?
Possibly. I mean, it would depend on probably what happens at the district court level. But that part of the case is moving forward. We've been through discovery and all of that stuff. So we're maybe looking at a trial in that case possibly next month. So once we
maybe
get that,
not years, maybe more like months or a couple of years.
We'll see. I mean, it's like I said, it's just a lot of it's going to depend on what happens in the case at the district court level.
You have to have a lot of patience.
Yes, and your listeners, please pray for the Kennedys because they have been going through this for many years now, and as you said, it could be another year or two before it's over.
Well, with these cases, with the Bladensburg case this summer, it was you surgically cut out the Lemon test from really being part of our jurisprudence. I mean, it's really, we're protected much more now. Our religious liberties are protected in ways that they haven't been in some of our lifetimes, especially yours, because you're so young. But same thing here with the Smith decision. Now there will be a change in the way establishment cases are looked at, and this could be permanent. So that's the beauty of the fact yes, it's hard work and it's long waits and patience and prayer and lots of legal knowledge, and it's just one of those efforts, but it's worthwhile. It's worth waiting for, and it's worth praying for. We're going to also talk about another important case, the Klein case, right after this. Stay with us for more of Point of View.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Dr. Ann Bradley has been on my radio program and in a recent article talks about her first trip to the Soviet Union. Even as a teenager, she could see through the attempt to make Russia look more prosperous than it was. In fact, her visit was one of the reasons she became an economist. She ends her article by telling the true story of what happened when Boris Yeltsin visited the United States. He was newly elected to the Soviet Parliament and the Supreme Soviet. After he visited the Johnson Space Center, he made an unscheduled stop at Randall's grocery store in Houston. The trip to this simple grocery store changed him forever. Yeltsin roamed the aisles to see a number of products available to every customer. They were offering free cheese samples. He was overwhelmed. He could not believe the bounty before him. Even members of the elite Politburo did not have the choices available to every person who walked into the store. A reporter captured his comments in an article in the Houston Chronicle. He said, "When I saw those shelves crammed with hundreds, thousands of cans, cartons, and goods of every possible sort, for the first time I felt quite frankly sick with despair for the Soviet people." He went on to say that such a potentially super-rich country as ours had been brought to such a state of poverty. It is terrible to think of it. What a statement from a man who was powerful and well-connected politically. He may have had great political power in Russia, but he was powerless to provide it to the Russian people, what was typical for all Americans. The communist government failed to provide the basic necessities for their people, and this is what happens in a centrally controlled economy. This is a lesson we need to pass on to our children and grandchildren. The abundance of goods on the shelves of the Houston grocery store weren't provided by the government. They were provided by a free market. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I'm Penna Dexter. In studio with me is Lathan Watts from First Liberty Institute. And I have nothing but admiration for First Liberty Institute. And we were just talking about the important judicial precedents that are being worked on through the cases that First Liberties has brought to the Supreme Court and is working on trying to get there. And I think, one of the things I like is there is an email that comes out every week, and it not only describes cases and their importance, but it just kind of gives you a primer on religious liberty and some really interesting articles there. And so, I was mentioning that to Lathan during the break that I really enjoy that because I get an education from reading it. And he mentioned a reaction he got from someone he met about the efforts of First Liberty and these efforts to protect religious liberty because, it doesn't matter who's in power, whether the left or the right is in power in Washington, D.C., we still have a U.S. Constitution, but we will not have a country that's guided by that unless we protect its principles. And we have people doing that. That's what you're doing, isn't it?
That's what we strive to do every day. And I was reminded of just recently one of those great Facebook reminders that pops up in your Facebook feed. And I had actually forgotten about this, but I read it again. I was on an airplane waiting to get to my seat, and a lady standing next to me saw I had a First Liberty lapel pin on, and she asked me about it. And I told her, that's First Liberty Institute. We're non-profit law firm. We defend religious liberty around the country. And she kind of looked at me and she said, "Nonprofit?" And I said, "Yes, ma'am. We're supported by donors, and that way our clients are never billed for the services." And She said, and you'll defend any faith anywhere in America? I said, yes, ma'am. That's what the First Amendment's all about. And she started grinning real big, and she actually teared up, and she said, she's like, oh, it's so nice to meet one of the good guys. And, I felt like, you know what, that's why I love my job. On my better days, I get to be one of the good guys. And that's what I told her. I was like, well, yes, maybe on my better days, I'll live up to your assessment.
You are one of the good guys.
But it's a blessing to get to go to work every day and work for, I can't think of a cause more important because we talk about it all the time. If religious liberty is taken away, everything will go eventually because that's why it's foundational. That's why it's first in the First Amendment. It's why we're called First Liberty. If the founders realized, if government got in between the space between man and God, then there's no limit to what government can do. They wrote it in the Declaration. They wrote it in other writings that men are created equal, created in the image of their Creator, and endowed with these rights by their Creator, and they believed that because of that, the first duty of man, the first obligation of man, is one of gratitude towards the Creator for making you in His image and giving you these rights. And however you choose to express that, that is worship. That's how they understood the role of religion in an individual's life, and that's why they wanted to protect people's right to live that gratitude however they choose to live it. So if you lose that, Jefferson even referred to religious liberty as the right of conscience, and that it should be one of the liberty held most dear, because even for people who aren't particularly religious, that protects their right of conscience also. They still have some ideal that they probably strive to live by, and you have the right to do so. And that's what our work at Religious Liberty, at First Liberty, is all about, and that's why we do it all over the country. Any people of any faith, and it's wonderful to meet people like Coach Kennedy, and work on his behalf, or Aaron and Melissa Klein in Oregon, or Paul Malcolmson in tiny little Walt Hill, Nebraska. This little church that's literally changing lives on a daily basis there. We say it all the time. Our ministry is to protect your ministry.
Yes, and let's update people on one case. To me, this one is a story. It's a story of a family, the Klein family, who had a bakery in Oregon. And this is way back before we even got the Supreme Court case in Obergefell that basically said we had to have same-sex marriage in every state, even those states that did not approve of it. But a same-sex couple wanted them to do their cake. She's very personal about how she does wedding cakes and tells the story of the couple. Couldn't do a same-sex cake because of her faith. It's been years since they began to be attacked in that state. They've lost their business. They've been penalized financially. And this, they're continuing to fight, which I really appreciate. And they can only do it because of First Liberty helping. But just update us on where we are with that case.
Certainly. So we took that case, went through the Oregon State Court, the Oregon Court of Appeals. The Oregon Court of Appeals upheld the decision by the state agency called the Bureau of Labor and Industry in Oregon, which had assessed one of the largest fines it had ever imposed on anyone against the Kleins, $135,000, which essentially put them out of business. And the Oregon Court of Appeals said that was okay. So we appealed that decision to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court did what we asked, which was it's called grant, vacate, remand. So they granted it, which means they took the case, vacated, which means they basically eliminated the lower court's decision, and remanded, sent it back to that same court, basically saying, hey, do this again. And part of that order was you need to hear this case again in light of the Masterpiece Cake Shop decision from the previous term, which says government cannot be hostile to the religious beliefs of its citizens. And the Oregon Bureau...
It's the same situation. There is the hostility there like it was in the Masterpiece case.
Absolutely. I mean, the administrator of the Oregon Bureau of Labor and Industries, which for somebody who grew up during the Cold War, that has like a Soviet ring to it anyway, the Bureau of Labor and Industry. But the administrator said that his goal was to rehabilitate the Kleins. And he and others, said some things about the Kleins and their faith and made it clear that they were hostile to the religious beliefs of the Kleins.
But you don't want the case to be based on that hostility, do you?
Well, before you can even get to the First Amendment question, you have to get the government involved to learn the lesson once and for all. You cannot be hostile to your citizens' religious beliefs. How can these people expect a fair hearing when you make it clear that you can't stand this religious belief of theirs? So before you can even really get to the merit, in my opinion, before you can really get to the merits of the First Amendment question, of the free exercise question, you have to train state governments to treat their citizens in a neutral way. That's the government's responsibility towards religion, is to be neutral towards it. It's not to compel people into one religion, but it's also not to be hostile to people of faith. So that's what really the Masterpiece Cake Shop decision was about, and that's what the Supreme Court told the Oregon Court of Appeals. You need to do this again because you clearly didn't give this woman a fair shake. And so now we're back at the Oregon Court of Appeals. We've filed briefs with the court again, and we're expecting a decision, really any day now. So we're just kind of in a holding pattern to wait and see what the Oregon Court of Appeals says. They could go, one of many ways. They could take the decision from Masterpiece and say, thanks, you're right, we got it wrong. We're going to make everything okay for Aaron and Melissa. They could also say, thank you, Supreme Court. We had already read the Masterpiece Cake Shop decision we still think we got this right. And if that's the case, then we'll probably have to appeal back to the U.S. Supreme Court again. But right now we're waiting on the decision from the Oregon Court of Appeals, which could happen any day. We're just kind of sitting on go, waiting to see what they say.
So keep listening, especially on Fridays. Here on Point of View, we keep you updated on these cases. Well, next up, I do want to mention we'll be joined by Congressman Chip Roy of Texas. And we're going to talk because he's become very concerned about this case where a Texas father, Jeffrey Younger, has been attempting to stop his 7-year-old son from being forced into a gender transition by his mother. And she's a pediatrician, Younger's ex-wife. And jurors this week decided not to grant Mr. Younger sole managing conservatorship over this little boy. Actually, he's a twin, so over the 2 twin boys. And which everyone was very afraid that meant mom had complete control. Well, a judge kind of pulled back on that a little bit yesterday, saying that they will have joint conservatorship over the boy. Still, there's a real threat, and we're just going to talk with the congressman about 2 things. One, what is this? Is this considered child abuse? Should governments be involved when parents transition their children at a very young age from their biological sex to another one? And also, what is going on in the state of Texas? Governor Greg Abbott now and others are getting involved. So this is a heartrending story. We've spoken with the father at length here at Point of View, and we're going to give you, I guess, the rest of the story.
There's an old saying that the first casualty in war is truth. Maybe that helps you understand what's happening in America right now. Thankfully, it's not a war with bullets, but there is a war for control. Control of the country and control of your pocketbook. Truth is under fire, but you can help turn the tide by supporting Truth. Join the Truth Team at Point of View Radio. Learn how you can make a difference at pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Don't let truth become a casualty on your watch. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151.
So what would you do with an extra $500 a month in your budget? Pay off loans, save it, do something fun? Well, it's something you may need to think about if you become a member of MediShare. MediShare is a Christian healthcare sharing ministry, and it works. You can save big time on your healthcare costs, and you don't have to pay for things you don't believe in either. Find out more. Call 855-SHARE-40. That's 855-SHARE-40. 855-SHARE-40.
Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Penna Dexter.
Welcome back to Point of View. Lathan Watts from First Liberty Institute is also in studio with me, and we are now going to jump to this heartrending story of James Younger. Back in early spring, we had Jeff Younger in studio for an hour for him to tell the story of the battle between him and his ex-wife over their twin boys, especially James, who mom says is wants to be a girl and treats as a girl, calls her Luna. And the dad, Jeff, who wants to protect this little boy as he was born as a little boy. And it's just a crazy, crazy story. And just a couple of facts that will help you if you haven't heard it, although I don't know how you could have missed it lately. It's been in national news this week. But it's been 2 or 3 years since the mom, I guess, saw him playing with a toy, a McDonald's toy, and choosing the girl toy. And it just seemed, I don't know all the details, but it seems that was one of the things that prompted her to help him to identify that he may be a little girl. And really, it sounds like he acts like a girl with her and with anything that she influences, including the school. But when he's with dad, when he's with his brother, when he's with other people, he's all boy. And it's heartbreaking because the mom has had so much more power for making decisions. She's put him in counseling with a psychologist. She started the gender transition idea, although he's too young for the hormones and puberty blockers yet. But that's all been ahead, and that's why this dad has been fighting for the life of this little boy. This week, a jury, 11-1, said that dad would not get sole control of the boy, which he was seeking just because to protect him from all of these things the mother wants to do. But the very next day, a judge kind of pulled back and said they could retain joint control, conservatorship over him. So now I think it's gained attention, and even the governor of Texas and others are weighing in. And one who has weighed in, and I think in a very good way, is Representative Chip Roy of Texas. And he's new in the Congress and a very good sort of asset, national treasure, I would say. On the conservative side, he's worked as a federal prosecutor and advisor to many Texas elected officials, including being chief of staff to Senator Ted Cruz. He was also staff director for Senator John Cornyn, and he has been senior counsel to the Senate Judiciary Committee, and he was also first assistant attorney general under Ken Paxton. Now he represents the district that stretches from South Austin through the Hill Country to downtown San Antonio, and we're hearing a lot about him. This is the first time he's joined us here on Point of View. Thank you, Congressman Roy, for being with us.
Well, Penna, thank you so much. Thanks for having me on. Thanks for being a voice for reason and promoting both our faith, the things that we believe in, and making sure that people know what's going on when our government's running contrary to those principles. And so I'm really delighted to be on the show. Thank you.
I know you weigh in on so many different issues, but this one just has such an emotional kind of a dramatic tone to it, in a sense. And this week, as it's come to national attention, I was so glad to see that you've been weighing in on it. And I think, one of the big concerns here is, what right does a parent have to take a child born in a certain sex and move them over to another one? And that's really the battle here, isn't it?
Well, it is, although I think there's an even bigger battle at stake. I mean, right now, you and I think, would agree, and most of your listeners would agree, as a conservative, we believe very strongly in parental rights, right? We believe very strongly in deferring to what parents want and the best interest of their children. But there is a line, and what we're seeing in this context, we have a divide between two parents, a dispute, and we also have the fundamental altering of a person's being, who they are, and not their soul, obviously, from a faith perspective, but who they are on this earth, the body that the good Lord has given this young boy or anyone in a similar position. We are totally destroying the fabric of our society, our culture, through this kind of action. This is nothing more than a fad. This is the the musings of the cultural elite who like to sit in cocktail parties and talk about how enlightened they are, while they're flying right in the face of God-given normalcy, where we have men and we have women. And this is also a function of first world problems. You don't have people in Chad who have the lowest per capita, I think, income in the world, or other places where they're struggling. You don't have people over there sitting around going, hey, I wonder if, Bobby over there, ought to be a girl, right? Because they're trying to figure out how to get food on their plate. They're trying to figure out how to survive. They're trying to figure out how to get electricity or running water. And here we've got people who are frankly too fat and happy and bloated on our largesse as a nation that we are now tipping into the kinds of things that we saw bring down the Roman Empire. And it is up to those of us who recognize our God-given rights, recognize our founding principles reinforcing those rights, in standing up for them to defend not just this little boy, who I'm happy to stand up and try to help defend, but really our society and culture, which is getting ripped to shreds by a cultural elite more concerned with how many letters they can add to the Soji list of letters that make them feel good at cocktail parties.
Well, I'm so glad that you put it this way, because a lot of times we bring up these topics of how the LGBT, quote unquote, agenda is forcing itself. And it's not because we are bigots against folks who struggle with these things. It's because we are beginning, and it's accelerating, seeing it control things and run over the rights of people who actually believe that God made us a certain way.
Well, you know what, Penna? Let me tell you something that's been interesting in the last 48 hours since I put a letter out. And for your listeners to know, I believe this is a state and local issue predominantly. I was glad to see Governor Abbott weigh in and the Attorney General, my former boss, Ken Paxton, weigh in, as they should. I was glad to see this judge walk it back a little bit and go reinforce the rights of the father, as we saw unfold. But there's still a long ways to go for this young boy. But here's what's interesting. I've had many people reach out to my office since I sent a letter to the United States Attorney General, the head of NIH, the head of HHS, the head of ONDCP, asking about the implications of some of these issues. I asked for a study about suicide rates, about how many of these young people who might be claimed to have gender dysphoria because of a parent or somebody claiming it, how many of them grow out of it or end up not going down that road? And the numbers are extraordinarily high, like 85 to 90%, as you would expect, right? My 8-year-old daughter, still believes in Santa Claus and still believes in, we never really taught her about the tooth fairy, but those who do, right? I mean, they believe in things that, aren't, you're not going to let them choose what sex they're going to ultimately have. And so this is what we're actually seeing. And so I've had a lot of people call my office from the lesbian, gay, and community saying, hey, we actually are glad you sent that letter, because this is not how this should be done, right?
Really?
They don't want that kind of thing being forced on people. And I think that's important here, right? Like, I've got my disagreements with any number of lifestyles, including, by the way, heterosexuals who sleep around too much or drink too much or whatever, right? We all sin and fall short of the glory of God. But I've got my problems with various lifestyles, but fine. We all figure out how to live with each other and agree to disagree and move forward. And I think it's interesting that we've got people here who I might disagree with on marriage or some issues, but are saying, yeah, I mean, look, we're talking about 7-year-old children here. So, look, I think this is a bridge too far that's showing how much this is truly a cultural phenomenon. It's almost like a hip fad kind of situation.
I think you're exactly right, Congressman. This is Lathan Watts, First Liberty, and I'm glad that you bring that up, because we were talking earlier about policy matters, and this young boy is going to be a victim of a cultural phenomenon that is completely out of touch with reality. This mother and pediatrician, ironically enough, should of all people know that what she's attempting to do to this kid is impossible. You cannot change him from a boy to a girl. You can mutilate his body, and you can pump him full of hormones, and you can do all sorts of things to him. They're going to damage him psychologically for the rest of his life and probably make it far more likely that he commits suicide, but he will still be a boy.
Well, thank you for saying that, and I couldn't agree more. First of all, let me say for the listeners out there, that First Liberty is a fantastic organization out there on the front lines defending our religious liberty and all things related to that. And couldn't be happier than to associate with and work with over the years with Kelly Shackelford and Hiram Sasser and Matt Kazmarek, my law school classmate, who's now on the bench, and Jeff Mateer, who's the first assistant attorney general after I left, and all of the folks there at First Liberty, and really appreciate you joining the show and making that point. It's right, and this is
we love it too. And I'm gonna jump in here because we're just about to have a break, and so we'll continue your reaction to Lathan's question. But thanks for talking about that wonderful organization, First Liberty Institute. We so appreciate them. We're so glad you're with us, Representative Chip Roy. We will continue talking about the James Younger matter. It's got great repercussions. We'll be right back. It appears that a United Nations agency is blocking pro-life groups from registering for a population conference set to take place in Nairobi, Kenya in mid-November. The conference is co-hosted by the UN Population Fund, commonly known as UNFPA, along with the government of Kenya. This conference marks the 25th anniversary of the Cairo Conference on Population and Development. Its organizers aim to accelerate implementation of the Cairo Plan of Action. At the Cairo Conference, delegates agreed on a strategy for stabilizing the world's population. Non-governmental organizations are important players at these UN conferences. Several pro-life NGOs have not yet been accepted to the Nairobi conference. These include Family Watch International, the Washington, D.C.-based Heritage Foundation, and CFAM, a pro-family nonprofit headed up by Austin Ruse that has worked for years to monitor and influence the social policy debate at the United Nations. Austin Ruse points out that at the Cairo conference, ultimately abortion was cast in a negative light as something to be avoided, a matter for national governments and not for international organizations like the UN. But UNFPA succeeded for the first time at getting reproductive health officially defined as including abortion in the document produced by that conference. Their goal was to deal with overpopulation. One could argue that today, 25 years after Cairo, those concerns have been replaced by fears of devastating consequences from declining birth rates. So why does the UN need to accelerate its efforts to reduce populations? The answer? Abortion. UNFPA is all about the promotion of abortion, even coerced abortion. UNFPA doesn't want pro-life NGOs forcing negotiations on the document they've already written to bludgeon nations into accepting pro-abortion policies. This cynical effort to magnify pro-abortion voices at the UN must be stopped. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. We are talking about the case of James Younger, twin boy, and if you haven't been listening, the dad is trying to protect him as a boy. The mother is all for and taking actions to transition him to a girl, and that begins very early with puberty blockers. And so, our guest is Congressman Chip Roy of Texas. Mentioned the idea that this is really a fad, but it will have long-term, lifelong consequences for the child. So, Lathan, you were engaging the congressman on this issue, so go ahead.
I was just kind of reiterating your point, Congressman, and then asking if you think that as you said before, that we may have finally reached the bridge too far, and that we might actually see our culture sort of return to reason when it comes to these issues. It feels like we've been in kind of a neo-romantic period where everything is driven by emotion and feeling, and we need to return to the age of reason. And do you think like a case like this, because it has drawn national attention, could maybe be that first step towards turning a corner?
Well, I appreciate that question, because I'm certainly hopeful that this is the case. I have been at least gratified in a world in which so many things seem upside down to see a fairly stout response to this, including from those not necessarily always aligned with, I think, you and I ideologically on these matters. And so I am hopeful that it's somewhat of a bridge too far. And to be clear, there are other decisions going back to Obergefell and marriage, 5 years ago, and I can't believe, about 4 years, whatever that was, and so forth, that are troubling still today. And we're seeing this all play out, right? Let's now look at where you're seeing this show on television on polyamory or whatever the heck it is. And some recent activities with one of my colleagues that's, concerning. And some of these things that, people are now accepting as normal. So we've got a long way to go. But I'm hopeful that something like this, where we're talking about a child, 7-year-old, and you're talking about a mom who's a pediatrician, I still can't understand that, who is playing with this boy's life. For me, I don't understand how a parent can do that. It would raise questions for me about her state of mind. But I do think to some degree, that's why I mentioned this being a fad, is that we've got this cultural phenomenon that we cannot allow to become a excuse or unexcused for harming people, harming kids. And, we've got to stand up. I mean, I think a number of things have been bridges too far in my world. I'm just hopeful this is one that will get a larger majority of the world to recognize why this is nuts. I mean, look, CPS, Child Protective Services, will be called on you or me if we leave our 8-year-old in a park for 10 minutes unattended, right? But yet you can have a parent go take a 7-year-old to a doctor to get their sex changed. It's just insanity.
I will mention that we have done some interviews, Congressman Roy, with pediatricians, and there are some pediatric organizations, medical associations for doctors who are pushing this agenda, and certain doctors actually feel ostracized if they stand for protecting a child in the gender that they were born in, for not taking these little clues and jumping on them and changing the gender. There's actually a move within pediatrics. And so, my guess is that the mom is influenced by those groups. And, when we've talked to others, they've said, no, you need to go to the underlying mental problem that causes a person to want to change their gender. This is a Band-Aid solution for people that have true gender dysphoria. But in the case of James, he's too young to have permanent gender issues. He's a pawn. He really is. And I'm so glad now that this has come to the attention and there's some action being taken. I hope it's sustained action.
Well, I mean, there are, and I don't want to impute any characterizations of this boy's mom. I've never met her. I haven't read the files. But there are a number of studies. Let's take James and his family out of it. There are a number of studies that have indicated a correlation between those parents, moms, dads, who are trying to do this to their children, that they have some sort of deep-seated mental illness, disorders, et cetera, bipolar disorder or otherwise. And I think we've got to be cognizant of that, cognizant of the amount of drugs and that are flowing and being used by people on prescription basis and otherwise. There's a lot of stuff that's impacting everything. This is why part of my letter to HHS and the organizations, NIH, to look into this stuff, it involves questions about also drug use and suicide rate for those that end up engaging in these things, of which I've read studies of showing they're 19 times higher than the average person. Again, this is an irreversible impact on this person's life. I mean, if you mess up a kid's name and give them some weirdo name, you can go change your name, right? If you don't put them in necessarily the best school, child can still, get through that and rebound or whatever. But you do this, it is literally irreversible. and you're undermining their well-being and their mental health going forward. So glad to see the governor acting, the attorney general. I'm going to hopefully press to get some more information on this so we can try to save this for the future Jameses of the world. I hope the judges continue to use common sense here. In this case, I'll say continue. At least this most recent decision was a step in the right direction, and hopefully they'll go further.
Representative Roy, first thank you so much for joining us today, and I'm glad for your voice and for your weighing in. I just want to ask one more question, and that is, you mentioned parental rights, and this goes beyond the parental rights that we like to protect here. But what about the government role? I mean, now we're asking people in public office now to step in on this. And, would this be more appropriate to be handled at a state level or a federal level or a little bit of both? How do you see this, or have you gotten there yet?
Well, I mean, it depends on which issue you're talking about, right? When you're talking about the very specific questions, like Governor brought up Child Protective Services and looking at the well-being of the child, you're looking at laws dealing with some of the questions at play. I mean, should this kind of thing even be legal in the first place? These are all predominantly state and local issues. And I'm sure my friends at First Liberty would agree largely with that. And as a federalist, I generally don't want the federal government interfering with Texas hardly at all.
Yeah,
exactly.
At the end of the day, the more we can keep decision-making here, we'll figure it out. We're the 10th biggest economy in the world, and that's how our system of government is supposed to function. But there is a role for the federal government in a broad sense, right? We are uniquely able to collect data, look at things on a macro scale, and then make that available, make that information and data available to states and to people who are making decisions. I'm not a big fan of a whole bunch of studies. I think a lot of studies are wasting federal taxpayer dollars. But, occasionally there's some questions that ought to be looked at and answered, and we're in a unique ability to do some of that, easier than states figuring out how to do it across, 50 states. So I think that's kind of the limited role of the federal government in this context. Obviously, you're always looking to protect constitutional rights, and there's all of our layers of government are supposed to protect our God-given rights that are reflected in the Constitution.
Thank you so much, really, for your actions this week, for weighing in. We're so grateful that you are there representing folks in a part of the state of Texas, but really, I think, common sense, too, in the Congress. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Thanks for making this an issue that's front and center for your listeners and for continuing to have good discussions on the issues that matter. Really, truly, thanks to First Liberty. Thank you, guys. Keep fighting. We got a long ways to go to continue to defend our religious liberty, and you guys do it better than anybody I know, so appreciate it.
Thank you.
God bless you, Congressman. Ladies and gentlemen, we're opening up the phones on this issue, 800-351-1212. Do you have thoughts on the James Younger case and just this whole situation? Many of you have listened over the months that we've talked about it. Now it's coming to a head. At least there's national attention to it. So give us a call, 800-351-1212, if you'd like to talk about it. We'll do some election and impeachment talk in the next hour, so stay with us for more.
When you gift a point of view, does it make a difference? Jeremy Dice would tell you that it does. He grew up listening to Point of View in the back seat of his mom's car, and it helped to shape his thinking.
I had parents that were able to sit across from me at the dinner table after we listened to Marlon Maddox and Kirby Anderson years ago and think through what the scriptures say about these issues of current significance in our lives. That's only possible because Point of View has come along and ministered into my life and made me who I am today. And here I am today defending religious liberty, partly because Marlon Maddox and Penna Dexter and Kirby Anderson were the ones that were pushing me towards all that. They taught me how to think through these issues. They didn't tell me what to think. They taught me how to think.
Each gift you give will change lives. Not every Point of View listener will become a Jeremy, but if they listen for very long, they will be changed. And that will change how they impact and affect the lives of the people around them. So make that decision to change a life today. Join the Truth Team and boldly stand for truth in a world of lies, distortion, and information manipulation. Go to pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Thank you for sticking with us here for Point of View. I'm Penna Dexter. Lathan Watts from First Liberty Institute is in studio with me. And Lathan, this is, I don't know, it's so sad that it's hard for me to look at this. I can look at it objectively, but without almost wanting to cry over this little boy, 7-year-old James Younger, being transitioned to female by his mom. And it's a battle between the parents now. And just to update folks that weren't listening, it's being looked into by the Texas Attorney General's office and the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services. Governor Abbott tweeted about it. He said, the matter of 7-year-old James Younger is being looked into, again, by the Attorney General's office and the Department of Family and Protective Services. And a jury this week, 11-1, said that the father could not have his request granted to have medical authority over James, but that the mother would have sole authority. And the plan that we've seen from all directions is that she plans to transition him to a girl. Well, the judge walked it back the next day, and it's joint custody now. It's still going to be a battle between mom and dad, Lathan, and that's the sad part of this. But I am glad to see that the Governor Abbott, that Attorney General Paxton, and that a U.S. congressman from Texas, Chip Roy, are all very concerned now and taking some action.
Yes, I mean, the judge did sort of, as you said, kind of walk back the decision of the jury, and thank God for that. There's a reason that we give judges that sort of authority. We want them to use it sparingly. In most cases, you want the jury's verdict to be the jury's verdict. That's why we have a jury system.
I don't know how you get 11-1.
I don't know who these people are.
Yeah.
But bless their hearts, as my grandmother would say. So yes, it's a step in the right direction, but this kid is still in danger, in my opinion. He is in between, two parents. Children of divorce, it's inevitable. You're going to be impacted by it, but nothing like this. What this little boy is going to have to deal with. It has drawn, a lot of attention, as you said, the governor, the attorney general, and I think it's, and the Department of Child and Protective Services, and I think it's because it is hard to see this objectively as anything but child abuse. This is a 7-year-old boy. Okay, so he wanted to play with a girl's toy, or he liked the character Starfire on the cartoon that he was watching. This is normal behavior. Children go through phases. Everybody does. But what this mother is trying to do is to take, one or two indications of something and make a drastically life-altering decision about this boy's life at age 7. Why the rush?
Really?
Why if this really is a thing?
Let's just watch.
If this is truly a thing that he has, gender dysmorphia or whatever you want to call the mental aspect of it. Why start now? Why not give him time and see if he does grow out of this? See if this was just a phase, and next week he wants to be called a dinosaur, and the week after that he wants to be called something else. I mean, kids do this sort of thing. You don't chemically castrate somebody at this age or any age, honestly. It is hard to wrap my head
Lathan's
around.
head is exploding, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, it is, and I apologize because this is radio and you're supposed to talk, but I am virtually speechless at what this woman is doing to this kid, and the fact that she's a pediatrician. The first words of the Hippocratic Oath:
do no harm.
Do no harm. Why in God's name would you not wait and see if this is something that is a temporary phase this little boy is going through before you start doing things that aren't temporary and that cannot be fixed later? Your first obligation as a doctor, and clearly your first obligation as a parent, do no harm. You help this little boy through this, whatever this is. Even if you agree that the whole concept of somebody being transgender is valid, why would you do this to this kid right now? Why not let this kid grow up a little bit? And a kid that age, can they truly even express honestly if they were going through this, what they were going through? I mean, it's just baffling to me that this is going on.
I think he's being in a sense there's some coaching going on, because James Younger, when he was in the interview here, Lathan, and other times, he said that his ex-wife, Dr. Ann Georgelis, dresses him as a drag queen whenever he video chats with his dad. So she's sort of in your face with her ex-husband. He has false eyelashes and makeup. His hair has glitter in it. He's wearing a dress. And so, she puts him on the phone like that. Yet when he's in his father's home, he likes to dress as a boy, but then he'll respond to the girl name at school where his mother put him, and at home with her and with her friends. So it just seems like there's a lot of pressure being placed on this little boy, not to mention other ridiculous and stupid and unparental actions. Let's take some calls on this, and people are calling in. 800-351-1212. Daryl is in South Carolina. Hi, Daryl. Thanks for calling.
Yes, hi. I was concerned also, as the congressman explained, about the influence of drugs and maybe people having a distorted view of reality. But I also look at it from
I had never thought of that. What do you think? I mean, elaborate a little.
I also combine that with the pharmaceutical industry and their agenda. And it to me, this is what the forces of darkness are using. It's a combination of different things. But I think it's all pointing towards the Antichrist system and casting off restraints and removing all biblical boundaries from what God has established for us. And in the process of removing these boundaries, nothing is out of bounds or nothing is out of limits. And the sad thing is, we have to realize that even during the time of great tribulation, some of these people will not change. They will not turn to God because they have an agenda. They are being influenced by the spirit of Antichrist, and all of the judgment and the plagues and the destruction that's going to come upon the earth because of this rebellion, because it's actually rebellion towards God's.
Yeah, it really is a rebellion toward God. Hey, Daryl, thank you so much for weighing in. We're just about up on the break. So I wanted to thank you for that call, and I think it's really true. It's a rebellion against God and how he made us, and that goes very deep.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Dr. Ann Bradley has been on my radio program and in a recent article talks about her first trip to the Soviet Union. Even as a teenager, she could see through the attempt to make Russia look more prosperous than it was. In fact, her visit was one of the reasons she became an economist. She ends her article by telling the true story of what happened when Boris Yeltsin visited the United States. He was newly elected to the Soviet Parliament and the Supreme Soviet. After he visited the Johnson Space Center, he made an unscheduled stop at Randall's grocery store in Houston. The trip to this simple grocery store changed him forever. Yeltsin roamed the aisles to see a number of products available to every customer. They were offering free cheese samples. He was overwhelmed. He could not believe the bounty before him. Even members of the elite Politburo did not have the choices available to every person who walked into the store. A reporter captured his comments in an article in the Houston Chronicle. He said, "When I saw those shelves crammed with hundreds, thousands of cans, cartons, and goods of every possible sort, for the first time I felt quite frankly sick with despair for the Soviet people." He went on to say that such a potentially super-rich country as ours had been brought to such a state of poverty. It is terrible to think of it. What a statement from a man who was powerful and well-connected politically. He may have had great political power in Russia, but he was powerless to provide it to the Russian people, what was typical for all Americans. The communist government failed to provide the basic necessities for their people, and this is what happens in a centrally controlled economy. This is a lesson we need to pass on to our children and grandchildren. The abundance of goods on the shelves of the Houston grocery store weren't provided by the government. They were provided by a free market. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
We are taking your calls at 800-351-1212 about this story that's almost too much to be true about James Younger, the 7-year-old boy who mom says he needs to be a girl, that he wants to be a girl, and she's going to take steps to make sure that he becomes a girl. Dad says no. It's a custody battle, and it's also just a battle over the life and health and well-being of this little boy. And now it's becoming a battle sort of for our culture in a sense. It's the transgender issue. It just popped up its ugly head, Lathan, so quickly after the Obergefell Supreme Court decision bringing same-sex marriage. I was a little bit shocked about that, but it really did, and it's moved fast and forward like a freight train, hasn't it?
It reminds me of something that Congressman Roy said in his time on the air, that that this, it's like this cultural fad that people want to talk about at cocktail parties, and some don't seem to grasp that this is impacting people, their life, and this little boy is a victim of this cultural phenomenon where it's like the emperor has no clothes, where we just are pretending that it's possible that you can change this little boy into a little girl. You can't do it. You can mutilate his body. You can pump him full of hormones.
That's right, but he will still
you
be a
can put
boy.
him in a therapist's office who should be helping him accept the fact that he is a boy. Instead, the therapist is going to try to convince him that, no, you're right. You should be a girl. You're just a girl trapped in a boy's body. And at the end of the day, he's going to end up still a boy and far more likely to have serious mental issues the rest of his life, and far more likely to commit suicide. The stats show it. I'm glad that Congressman Roy has asked for federal agencies to do more study to provide that information. But it's nonsense.
Yeah.
It's
And
absolute
as you said,
nonsense.
it's
it is
real.
It is, and but
But
it's
it's a real
damaging
issue.
people's lives.
And we have a caller who's for whom this is very real. Her name is Janine in Alabama. So let's go there. Janine, thank you for calling in. Tell us your story.
Yes, thank you so much for taking my call. I want to tell you that I appreciate your show because a lot of times I'm riding around in the car, typical mom, taxi mom, and I've got my kids in the car. And I just wanted to share something because I think that my story is a little unique, and I'm hoping that any other parent out there and who maybe has their kid in the back of the car who feels like my child might be listening to this show and understand that, first of all, we as Christian parents truly believe that Jesus loves us and he died for our sins. And we are, as Christians, to show that love to others. And my daughter has not so recently shared with us that she believes that she wants to transgender. And as a Christian parent, that is a very difficult thing to hear from your child because you're stuck in a place where you know what God says about it, you know what the Word says about it, and you also are attached to this child, especially as a mother. That child lived in you. You've known that child since the day you knew that you were pregnant, and you love that child so deeply. And it's a really difficult place to be. My child told me was after she went through a period of being very depressed. She was cutting herself. She had not only thought about suicide, but was to the point where she was thinking about how she was going to do it. And through counseling and through things, we talked about it. And so she and I share this conversational debate. And so a lot of times when we're listening to Christian radio talk shows, things will come up. And it's addressed in a manner that is always a little hard for her to take because it comes from just the perspective maybe of what God says in his word. But when we are talking to people about their gender issues and about their gender confusion and things like that, we as Christians need to remember to address it from a point of love and from a point that Jesus saved us from the worst things that we could have possibly done in our past. And that not only that, but what we'll do in the future. And he loved us through that. And so we really need to make sure that we're addressing that through a point of love. And I wanted to share with you the thing that caught my ear in the first minutes of your show that made me call, and that was it was reiterated that the mother wants this. And I think that we really need to look at what the child is saying to the mother. The mother should have the mentality that the child is 7 years old when they're telling her this, and that there is definitely, at the very least, a point of working with a counselor. There's a point of waiting. There's also the perspective that I wanted to share of, I just heard on the radio talk show on another program today about how many people have transgendered and now are transgendering back to their original gender.
Right, and some of the damage that is done when you do that. You can't wipe out the effects, especially if you've had surgery. But even if you haven't had surgery, you've taken the hormones, there's damage that's done to the body. Listen, I just so appreciate your calling. Janine, can I ask how your daughter is now? How's she doing and what's she doing? And are you still waiting? Or you have to deal with this, and you care about her well-being.
And I care about her eternal salvation.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a really difficult place to be. There's a lot of rejection that comes from the Christian as well as the non-Christian community because of it. There has been, I'm sure there will be. What I do is come to her constantly from a point of love. I never bring it down to, being cut and dry. And it's the hard and fast facts that this is what God's word says. And if you don't do that, you're going to go to hell. And I'm really sorry, but that's what it says, and that's it. I always come to her, and we talk about things from a point of love, a point of grace. I come to it from a point of faith in believing that it's very hard for people who are in that to see that that's something that they even need to be, quote, healed from. They feel like, why do I need to be healed for something that I feel? And I think that we need to really remember that the devil is here to steal, kill, and destroy. And I think that most Christians need to also admit that at one time or another in life, they may have been looked at someone of the same gender and had maybe been attracted to them. But we know that those things that happen to us in those lights, like having an adulterous affair, or drugs or alcohol, or all these different things, sin is sin in God's eyes. And maybe this sin weighs differently. I mean, I'm really not going to get into the all that, but that, we need to.
Yeah. Let me jump in and ask a question before the break, because I don't want it to interrupt you.
Sure.
Just because where the position you're in, I think we need to get some wisdom from you. And that is, Jeff Younger, the dad in this Younger case, he wants to protect his son from drugs, surgery, and, all the physical issues and the emotional issues that are about to happen to him if the mother's in control. You're in that position, too, to protect your daughter, or to try to. Now, there's some ways in which parents can't as the children get older. So can you just tell us a little bit about that?
Well,
or how are you dealing with that challenge? That's a hard challenge.
Okay. Through a lot of conversations with God, a lot of talking to him about where we are, and about what we hope is going to happen at the end of all of this. It is the hope that keeps us, and the being able to, like David, he shared with God when he was joyful and when he was even angry at God, because he knew that God was omniscient and that he knew what was in his heart. And so he shared that with him. And so I love her so much, because especially as a Christian, the love that God gives you and pours into you, you can't help but love deeper. But we're dealing with it, and that's how I'm dealing with it from a spiritual point of view. And then from a medical point of view, because of the depression and the anxiety that it causes her, we have sought counseling and we've sought medication for those issues, just to be able to kind of get us in a better place to work through these things. Just like I think that Dad is coming from I'm sure he's very frustrated.
I got to jump in because it's a break. Your daughter is blessed to have you, Janine. Ladies and gentlemen, we are still taking your calls. We'll be back.
There's an old saying that the first casualty in war is truth. Maybe that helps you understand what's happening in America right now. Thankfully, it's not a war with bullets, but there is a war for control. Control of the country and control of your pocketbook. Truth is under fire, but you can help turn the tide by supporting Truth. Join the Truth team at Point of View Radio. Learn how you can make a difference at pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Don't let truth become a casualty on your watch. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151.
So what would you do with an extra $500 a month in your budget? Pay off loans, save it, do something fun? Well, it's something you may need to think about if you become a member of MediShare. MediShare is a Christian healthcare sharing ministry, and it works. You can save big time on your healthcare costs, and you don't have to pay for things you don't believe in either. Find out more. Call 855-SHARE-40. That's 855-SHARE-40. 855-SHARE-40.
Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Penna Dexter.
It was good that Janine called in, the parent of a daughter who's struggling with her gender. And, the parents really have a difficult role, but I think that there's certain things that are just kind of non-negotiable that parents need to do in these situations, aren't there?
Yes, and I definitely agree with where Janine was talking about dealing with everything from the perspective of making sure that child knows that they're loved, and that's absolutely crucial, I think, especially with something as serious as that, telling that child the truth in a loving way, loving that child enough to tell them the truth, but in a way that that reassures them that they are still loved, so that the truth is, you were born this gender, and that is not going to change, and that fact, that truth, may cause you to have really bad feelings about yourself, about whether it's anxiety or feeling like you're not this gender or you're something else, and that you can help that child deal with those feelings, and love them enough to help them deal with those feelings, and get a counselor or a professional to help, certainly, to help them accept the truth of the gender that they were born, because, as I said before, that is not going to change, regardless of whatever the pop culture tells you, or all the drugs you want to take, or surgeries you want to have. So I don't claim to be an expert by any means, or a model of Christian parenthood. I do my best, but there's a expression around our house that gets tossed around a lot, mostly by me, that just because you feel something doesn't make it true. And so, if you had a bad day, you messed up in your life this week, and you feel like you're just the worst person in the world, I'll be the first person to tell you that's not true. I understand you feel that way, but that doesn't make it true. And that can be applied in a whole host of settings and emotions that we go through. That just because you feel it doesn't really make it true. It's true that you're feeling
society
that.
And culture are run on emotion.
That's exactly right.
And that's not that's a recipe for confusion and disaster.
Absolutely.
That's why we have a Bible and biblical truth. That's why we have a Constitution and other things, so that can bring us back to our moorings. Lathan, the phones are just jammed. It's crazy. And before I take another call, I want to bring in another subject, and people can weigh in on this one too, because this is something you and I have discussed before. I remember a couple times ago when you were in here with me on a Friday, and all of a sudden the Democrat National Committee passed a resolution about reaching out to atheists, to people, the nuns, and these are our people. And so you wrote a piece. I don't know if that's what prompted it, but you wrote a piece. Does the Democratic Party have a God problem? We've posted it at pointofview.net. Talk about the Democrats' God problem.
Well, thanks to, I think it was American Thinker that published that, we had discussed the resolution that the DNC had passed at their summer meeting before. And then you had, at a town hall event on CNN, you had Beto O'Rourke state affirmatively and, vehemently that churches and Christian schools and faith-based charities and others should lose their tax-exempt status if they do not support same-sex marriage or transgender or whatever it was. And he said, absolutely, it's going to be a priority for my administration to strip their tax-exempt status. And take that, the resolution that said religious liberty is just used as an excuse to discriminate against people on these types of issues, go all the way back to their last convention where there was an attempt to insert the words God-given in front of, I think, the word rights, and it was booed at the DNC National Convention. And the point of the piece was really pointing all of these things out, and even some of the statistics that show that people who have no religious affiliation are the fastest growing group. That means people who do have faith could eventually become a minority group in this country, and that we do a lot to protect minority opinion in this country, whether it's on politics, faith, whatever it may be. And that's what the First Amendment is about, is protecting your rights to live according to your beliefs, even when those beliefs aren't popular, especially when those beliefs aren't popular. The founders were very suspect of the tyranny of the majority. And so the real point of what I was writing about was that protecting religious liberty and protecting the right of conscience and the right to disagree should not be a partisan issue. That should be something that both parties can agree on. We can, the Republicans and the Democrats, there's a whole host of things that they are probably never going to agree on. But the right to disagree should not be a partisan issue. And so the title, do they have a God problem, was really just to kind of prompt this discussion of the right to disagree and the right to live according to your conscience, whatever informs that conscience, whether it's faith or how your parents raised you or whatever it may be. So it's unfortunate that it does appear like they do have a problem with it, but that it should not be. That should be a nonpartisan issue, protecting our First Amendment rights for everybody.
Yeah, protecting them. And also, I think just it used to be that both parties could reach out to people of traditional values and faith. And there are many of those people still in the Democrat Party. But I don't know that the leadership, they're not operating that way right now.
They don't seem to be welcome there.
Yeah.
If you read that resolution, that I also wrote this as, because the Democratic presidential debates are still going on. And I think these would make really interesting questions for the field, because I think people of faith in their party should deserve to know where those candidates stand. And whoever their eventual nominee is, the general public needs to know where they stand on this as well.
O'Rourke made himself
he made
fairly
himself
clear.
Very clear. That's exactly right.
Yeah,
And
some people could the moderators could play the others off on his statements. It would be very interesting and informative.
Absolutely.
We are taking, your calls on the James Younger issue. Let's go to David in Texas. David, thank you for calling in.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for receiving my call. I just wanted to say that this boy is being abused, and it's just like if you take, or anyone else here in Texas takes a baseball bat and hits that boy over the head with it, you're going to damage him. And most of the time when there's child abuse, we have a deal here in Texas that's called Department of Welfare or something like that, and that protects the children. Now, it seems to me that they would go into action and remove this boy from the parents and then have them go through counseling. That's what the deal is, because it's just as damaging to that boy to do this than it is to hit him with a baseball bat. And not only that, you're also damaging his little twin brother, you know, and so therefore you're really doing a lot of damage right there. And it doesn't, the way I see it, it doesn't make no difference if you're a rich person or a poor person. The welfare of the children is what's important to me, or not just me, I'm sure, but there's probably a lot up there that don't really care about children.
I think most people care about children. David, thank you.
Well,
you
yes,
make way too much common sense.
I apologize for that.
Don't apologize. Thank you for calling.
We need more of it.
I will say that Jeff, when he was in studio here, told me about Jude, the twin brother, and he would have both boys over, and they'd go out and play and get real dirty and take a shower. And so Jude is pointing to his brother's, obvious boyness, and, just asking his dad and saying, my brother's a boy. And this little he was 6 at the time, and under the arrangement, Jeff Younger, the dad, was precluded from saying too much in trying to convince the boys that little James is a boy. He actually is kind of got a gag type thing on him. And so, this is terrible. And that's why, yes, he said Child Protective Services might have to take him out of the home. You'd hate to take him away from the dad, but maybe temporarily with some counseling and some help. I don't know if that's the only way that it could happen to get it done, but to get him out of the influence of this mom. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we've got more calls here on the line. We'll take some, and we've only got one more segment. This show goes so fast, Lathan, sometimes.
Yes, it does.
Especially when our callers make it interesting, which they're doing today. So stay with us. We've got more of Point of View. It appears that a United Nations agency is blocking pro-life groups from registering for a population conference set to take place in Nairobi, Kenya in mid-November. The conference is co-hosted by the UN Population Fund, commonly known as UNFPA, along with the government of Kenya. This conference marks the 25th anniversary of the Cairo Conference on Population and Development. Its organizers aim to accelerate implementation of the Cairo Plan of Action. At the Cairo Conference, delegates agreed on a strategy for stabilizing the world's population. Non-governmental organizations are important players at these UN conferences. Several pro-life NGOs have not yet been accepted to the Nairobi conference. These include Family Watch International, the Washington, D.C.-based Heritage Foundation, and CFAM, a pro-family nonprofit headed up by Austin Ruse that has worked for years to monitor and influence the social policy debate at the United Nations. Austin Ruse points out that at the Cairo conference, ultimately abortion was cast in a negative light as something to be avoided, a matter for national governments and not for international organizations like the UN. But UNFPA succeeded for the first time at getting reproductive health officially defined as including abortion in the document produced by that conference. Their goal was to deal with overpopulation. One could argue that today, 25 years after Cairo, those concerns have been replaced by fears of devastating consequences from declining birth rates. So why does the UN need to accelerate its efforts to reduce populations? The answer? Abortion. UNFPA is all about the promotion of abortion, even coerced abortion. UNFPA doesn't want pro-life NGOs forcing negotiations on the document they've already written to bludgeon nations into accepting pro-abortion policies. This cynical effort to magnify pro-abortion voices at the UN must be stopped. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to the final segment of Point of View. I'm looking forward to next week. I get to host on Wednesday, and one of my guests will be Carrie Severino, who's the author of Justice on Trial, along with Molly Hemingway. And it's really a book about the judicial confirmation process. And the main story, of course, is the Kavanaugh hearings. And she's gone back and interviewed people. And also, well, both of them have come together to write a great book on it. And I'm excited to interview her on Wednesday. And so I'll look forward to that. But I did want to take the rest of these calls, if we can get to them, Lathan, on the Younger case at 800-351. Actually, don't call in. I can only take the ones I've got left, if I can take those. But also, I want to mention something about the Supreme Court, because it's really an election issue. And when Trump was elected, a lot of Christians said they voted for him. They were skeptical, but they voted for him about the Supreme Court. And he had the list from the Federalist Society and the Heritage Foundation. And that list was just a marketing genius, really action, because he stuck to it. It helped with the election. He stuck to it, and the courts are being transformed because of this. Kathleen Parker, who is quote unquote conservative that writes for the Washington Post, said she agrees that this court issue, the Supreme Court issue, will be a huge issue in 2020 on both sides. She says people still trust the Supreme Court. Democrats, don't mess that up. That's her warning in her column this week. And not only does Trump have his list, now she said there is a new short list, this time from liberal groups, called a liberal group called Demand Justice. Apparently they saw the success that Trump had, so they've made their own list. Well, the only problem is their list, it hardly has any people that are really judges on it. It has all kinds of liberals. And she said, they're very far to the left, sort of off base, she says. Only 8 of the 32 people listed are currently judges, and the group opposes nominees with any corporate experience. So that kind of cuts out a lot of people. The list is heavy with activists, public defenders, public interest lawyers, academics, and plaintiff lawyers. So she said the problem is when people have a judicial background, there's a record by which to judge their philosophy and judicial temperament. But I don't think the left cares about that. What they want is people that will enact their agenda through the courts, don't they?
It's about results for them. It's about outcome-based analysis. Justice Scalia once was kind of famous for saying a judge that is happy with the results of every decision he makes is a bad judge. But that's exactly what they want. That is their ideal judge, is somebody who is always happy with the result, because that's what drove their decision in the first place, was to get the result they wanted. And I mean, just having people on there that haven't been judges is not really, that's not really a problem. I mean, some of President Trump's nominees were not judges before he put them on the bench, but they have legal experience. And just like the article mentions, if you do have judicial experience, there is a record for people to look at, and they can make judgment calls about you based on that. And that's very important. I mean, that's why we look at judges' records if they're being elevated to a higher bench. If they were a district court judge and they've been nominated for the Court of Appeals, or if they were a Court of Appeals judge and they've been nominated to the Supreme Court, that's one of the first things you do, is you look at their opinions over the course of their career, because that's the clearest way to indicate what their judicial philosophy is to read what they wrote in these opinions. So I agree with her that the judiciary and filling those empty seats will be a priority in this election, just as it was last time, because there are still seats to be filled. And that's as much about the courts of appeals and the district courts as it is the Supreme Court. I mean, everybody kind of talks about who the next Supreme Court justice pick will be, but the Supreme Court hears a very small percentage of the cases that are appealed to it, which means those courts of appeals end up being the last word on many, many cases. And so I agree with her. Picking judges and nominating them and confirming them is going to be a factor in the presidential election. And we'll wait to see how it plays out. I think you're right in that a lot of people did vote for President Trump on this issue. They may not have been comfortable with him on other issues, but this issue was important enough to them to be the deciding factor. And now they have 4 years of seeing the type of people that he has put on the bench. And I think if that was the reason that they voted for him, they are very likely going to vote for him again.
So you can find Kathleen Parker's piece up at pointofview.net and check it out. Let's go back to the phones. Joyce is in California. Hi, Joyce. Thanks for calling in.
Oh, hi. I just wanted to say that I could not believe it when I heard it, because, I haven't really heard a lot about it until today. And so I was just shocked, that they can do, mutilation on a child like that and get away with it.
They're doing it all the time.
It was Child Protective Services. What's going on here? I know I'm repeating what the other guy said, but I mean, it's true. You know, he's right. They don't even allow the Seventh-day Adventists to practice what they believe sometimes if they think it's too dangerous, you know. So then why are they letting these other people do dangerous things? I don't get it. Why do they have this kind of a privilege over other people that don't have that privilege? And, you know, and where's our religious, you know, what do you call it, waivers? I mean, how come Muslims can get them, but, you know, Judeo-Christians that really believe in God's medicine and not man's medicine can't even get a religious waiver? You know, and yet they're like able to mutilate children.
You're as frustrated as we are, Joyce. Thank you for calling. You know, the thing is never before I think we entered into this environment where it's just so mushy and wishy-washy, and you can't have traditional values or biblical values reign anymore. That, you know, you've taken all of that away, so we have this era of confusion, and now these things are allowed to happen. But I think the fact that it's come to light, maybe cooler heads may begin to prevail, at least in red states. I don't know.
Hopefully in this specific scenario, certainly. But you're right, this is playing out in other kids' lives around the country. This one has gotten a lot of attention, as well it should, and I hope that it's resolved for this little boy. But once you depart from the common understanding that, one, there is such a thing as truth, and two, it is knowable. Once everything becomes relative, you hear people talk about living your truth, or, you know, well, that's my truth. Boy, that's non-existent. There is truth and there is not truth.
And you'd think your bodily biological gender would be like exhibit one of that.
Yeah, exactly. But once a culture accepts that and rejects, you know, the notion that there is such a thing as truth and that everything is relative, we are living with the results right now. So hopefully maybe this is a turning point back to the truth, or at least the acknowledgement that truth exists and it is knowable. Then maybe we do have some hope for winning the culture back.
Well, I think, you know, just to continue talking about these things, I was a little frustrated thinking we're talking about James Younger on Point of View, but where else and who else is talking about this now? Others are talking about it, so I'm grateful for that. I'm sorry I couldn't take Adam's call. He was going to make a point about social media, and this is definitely a problem with these kids, especially this social contagion of gender dysphoria that's taking place among teenage girls. And they're getting affirmation from social media. I wish I could have taken that, Adam, but that's true. I don't think this is an issue that we will be addressing this again. So stay tuned, stay with us for Point of View. I want to thank you, Andrew and Steve and Karen, for everything. And Lathan, thank you so much for being in studio today.
Always fun to be here.
God bless you, everybody. Have a great weekend. Join us next week. We've got some great shows coming.
So when people first hear about Medi-Share, they have questions. Some good ones, like, what is it? Well, Medi-Share is a Christian healthcare sharing ministry. It's not health insurance. It's a different way of doing things, which leads us to this question. Why do so many become Medi-Share members? Two big reasons. They save a lot. The typical family saves $500 a month, and they feel great about it. With Medi-Share, you aren't forced to pay for things you don't believe in. Find out more. 855-SHARE-40. That's 855-SHARE-40.
It seems we can't get through a day without hearing how science has been corrupted to support political goals. Media entities have sold out truth for the sake of favored narratives. Even some religious groups have abandoned the Bible to support things based on feelings. So who can you trust? Kirby Anderson and the Point of View Truth Team are your source for real news. Learn how you can make a difference by joining the team at pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. In a world of unending fog, Point of View is a shining light. Do your part at pointofview.net/team or 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for